Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we are going to talk and learn about work queues and work queue items in Power Automate. So what are work queues? What benefit work queues gives us over normal flow? And in what scenarios or in what use cases we can use work queues and work queue items. So I've created one small overview slide over here. So what are work queues? So work queue in Power Automate is a centralized location or feature which can store and manage all the work related items. And what are work items? Work items are nothing but pieces of data which needs processing. So we can have our logic of processing based on the provided input in work queue items. And the prerequisite of having or creating work queues is we should have premium Power Automate license and with environment maker role. And what benefit we get out of creating work queues and work queue items? So it actually improves the efficiencies of complex or bulk processing scenarios. So consider an example: if you are a part of a retail company which is producing thousands of records daily per store basis or per sales basis, and you wish to have some Power Automate to process those incoming reports or data uh, from different stores and save or process something based on that input, then it may require a few hours to do the normal processing into a normal Power Automate flow logic, though like you are using a flow based license. So what work queues and work items brings over here is they can split the entire this complex transactions into small pieces in multiple flows, where one flow can act as a creation of the work queue items which will create the work items for you, which can be independently processed and stored in a centralized location where you can see like what items get processed, what through an exception you can rerun them, or you can actually take a decision based on the processing or monitoring output of that centralized location. So as I said, like it provides the improved efficiency by splitting the complex process or decoupling the complex processes from the loader to the processor, and then increase visibility. You have a better monitoring over the work items, whether these are processed or not, and ensure that business items gets processed to the successful stage or not. And then enhanced collaboration, for example, you can multiple at the same time you can have multiple human workers or machine bot if you are creating PDAs that can look to those process and take a decisive decisions and when to use. So as I gave you example where the workload is too high, we are dealing with a multiple thousand transactions and we want to make some split out the complex processing part out of the main flow. That's the scenario where you can easily use this. So let's talk about it in practical. So I went to my make.powerautomate.com, and over here if you scroll down you will find more. So if you don't see directly work queue over here, you can click on more. You can pin this up so that it can start appearing in your left navigation, and when you click on this work queue it lands you to this work queue page where you can start creating your work queues. So over here I can create a new work queue. So this is actually a repository to have all the work queue items inside it. So you can name it, for example I will say it finance sales queue, and description I'll just add the same description, and work queue key, so it should be unique, so you can simply specify that one and set default expiration of this work queue. So I'm just not enabling it and just creating this my work queue. So once it's created, we will land up into this detail page where we can go to advanced details. So there is a work queue ID, so we are going to deal with this work queue ID. So just remember to copy this so that in further flows we can use this one. So I'll later on come to this part again, and in this work queue items we will see all the work queue. So if you click on see all, you will see a better view of all the work queue items which will be a part of this finance sales queue. Now actually starting with this work queue item, if I click on this new, so it will allow me to create some manual work queue item which can be used by a flow to process and then pass on the status back to this work queue item. So the intent is we are not going to create anything manually over here. we will divide our process into two parts. One is controller. So controller flow would create the work items for us based on some automation, and then the processor part would actually process those individual items into a separate flow. So we are going to create two flows over here. So right now, just for the timing, I'm just skipping it and going back to my finance sales queue back. So we are good. So now, as I said, like we'll be creating two flows. So one is controller. So controller would be actually creating the work items for me. So consider an example. If you want to work with thousands of record in CSV or Excel, so that should be created individual work items into work queues. So consider that example. So what I'll do, I'll upload one of the Excel file into my SharePoint document library, and in that library, from that library, we are going to create one flow to create the work items, the queue work items, so that automatically all the work items can be created, and further the individual item can be processed by a processor flow. So I'm just going to create one instant cloud flow, and later on in this add a trigger, I'll just add a manual trigger, and in next step we are going to read our file, that is bulk transitional file from SharePoint. So what I'll do, I'll upload one of the file. So I've uploaded this Excel file, and if I open this Excel file, you will find it has some financial data over here. So you can see I have 16 rows and we have this table. So as soon as you are creating this Excel file, so that our Power Automate can read the items out of it, you have to just select it, then format that as table, any table, and in the table design you will be prompted up with a table name. So I have given this table as financial table name, so that I can read the items out of this table in my Power Automate. So that's a usual process which we have been doing for reading out any Excel file or the rows. So that is done, and now I'll go to this Power Automate, and I'll just say list rows out of my Excel. So list rows present in table, this action we are going to use, and I'll bind up my location of this file, and from here I'm going to choose my site, which is this site, SharePoint site, and the document library is contracts or finance stocks. Okay, so finance stock is my library. I'm going to pick this library and directly bind my Excel as this sample Excel, and table name, it will populate the table name by fetching out of this earlier table Excel file. So I'm selecting finance table, and we are done with this connection. And in the next action, we are going to read the item out of this Excel. So for that, I'll just simply use add a new row, because I want to create the work items, and work items where these work items get stored. So these work items get stored into my Dataverse table only. So if I just go to add a new row in Dataverse, if I just choose my table, so you will find that I would able to see my work queue items table into Dataverse. So I'm selecting it, and post selection, the name of the work queue item, which is by default auto number. So this one we are going to choose that from dynamic of columns of my earlier this Excel. So I'll just say work items, just consider that as ID, and is customizable, you can just leave that one, and work queue ID. So this is work queue ID which we have to. So how to get the work queue ID? So we'll be getting the work queue ID from that same step which we did. So I'll just duplicate this screen, make.powerautomate.com, so that I can copy my work queue ID which I showed you last time as well, work queues, and I'll just click on this one. So you can copy either from the top, or you can go to advanced details and copy this one. And once you copy it, you have to give a path. So it's work queues, and you need to pass on the work queue ID. So this way we'll be passing our work queue ID, and we are done with it. So it will add up the rows into a work queue items table as soon as whatever the list item we are going to read from. So I can minimize it. You can see that it has automatically binded it to the for each row items of this Excel table. So now we are done by creating this automated part of our controller flow. So I can just say this is work queue controller. So it controls the work queue items. So I'm just saving it. So this is part one. Now we can run our this workflow so that we can create all the work queue items. So I'll just go to this see all so that we can see once it's triggered. I'm just running our flow as run. So it's running, and I intentionally skipped one step so that I wish to show you what I have skipped it in our past creation of these work items. So there is one important thing which is called input, so that we are going to show you how input can be created. So right now it's running, and we can meanwhile go to our work items and we can see if work items are getting created or not. So right now you can see I have these work items created. There is a column that is input. So input we haven't passed. So if we are not passing an input, what the next flow would take as an input to process it? Nothing. So that's why. So if I go back to my flow, add it, and I'll just clean up the earlier items which are created over here so that we can start having the new set of items. I'll modify my controller flow again, and the part which we skipped was adding the input to my process and setting up the status of my flow. So once over here, like if I open this action, you will find that show all will open up my additional attributes or parameters, and I can scroll down and I can go over here and pick my input from my dynamic list rows. So you can see all the columns are being listed over here. So if I wish to, let's say I want to make a calculation on sales and gross sales profit or a ratio, then I can actually pass on this as an input. So if I just select it, and for a better processing, so if I wish to split it, then I should add one comma to it so that I can have these both input as a semi or comma separated values. I can just add gross sales. So I have this two input added to my this work item, and in the status I'll add this status as queued because it is queued for processing in my next process flow. So I'm just saving it, and now we can again do a test run. So now I'm expecting to have this my work items with a name, with the input, and with the queued status. And I am going to run this again, and going back to my financial sales queue, I'll just refresh this one and open this. We are waiting the queue items to get created. So now we have the queue items. The name is there with the ID of those column, and status is queued. And if I go to right hand side, I have this input. First part is my sales and the second is gross sales. So I can find out the ratio or profit or whatever calculation I wish to do in my separate processor flow. So right now we are good creating our the controller or the loader of this work queue items. So this is part one, and now I am going to create a new processor workflow or flow to process out these queued items. I am again going back to my create instant cloud flow so that we can start creating our processor logic, and the processor logic would take my trigger as when a row is added to my work queue table. So I'll just say when row is added, I'll choose that trigger, and I will choose my this as when row is added, and table is work queue items. So when the work queue items are created, then my processor flow should process based on my input. So I'm just choosing that scope as organization, and in the advanced parameter I'll just click on show all, And right now these are filters, so right now we are not going to use any filter, so we are good with the trigger. And in next action we are going to perform an inbound operation. So I'll just perform a bound action. So bound action works on a particular entity or table, so I can just pick that bound operation on my work queues this time, and the action name is DQ, and the row ID which we are going to use is from lastly work queue item, work queue row ID. So if I just open one more duplicate screen and go to my this work queues, so that I can copy the ID, because I did not paste that ID into notepad, so that's why I missed it. I'll just go to my queue again, advanced detail, copy this my work queue ID so that I can paste that into my queue. So we are done with this action, and now as part of next action we are going to use action as parse JSON, which can parse the output of my this previous action, perform a bound action, and then do a further processing. So for that I have to save it for once, so that I can actually get the output of my work queue item manually, and then generate the schema for my parse JSON action manually. So I'll just save this as a processor work queue flow and save it, so that we can run it as a demo or test run, just to extract the schema, XML schema out of it. So I'll just say I'll go to my queue and I will create one action as manual action, and that action would actually trigger my flow. So I don't want to do that for my previous queue. I would be required to create one manual one. So I'll just say 1000 and ID also 1000, something like that, and input 2 and 200 as gross sales. I'll just create it so that it will trigger my flow which we have just created, and we'll copy the sample body out of it, and it successfully ran. And I'll just copy the body which we get out of this perform bound operation, and now I am copying this, and as a part of next action I would be using now parse JSON. And in parse JSON I will copy this schema, copied schema as a generate from schema over here. So I'll just click on this, and the copied schema done, and the input is body of my dynamic perform a bound operation, this one. So we are good. I am just saving it and adding one more action to it, and that action is reading out or do some processing on my input. So now I would able to add one more action, that is compose, where I would be actually reading the input which we get from parse JSON, the previous step, and over here I go to dynamic one, and I will start getting all the attributes out of my previous JSON. So I'll just type in input. So there's a body input which we get from our parse JSON action, previous one. So this body input would give me my 2,200 the sales and gross sales, and I can do a string operation on this input, split that into two strings, do a calculation, mathematical calculation, and if I wish to save or update it somewhere, then I can easily do that. So right now whatever your business logic requirement comes, it will actually fall under these steps. So once you parse your JSON as an input, do calculation whatever you wish to, and then finally we have to update row back to our queue item, so that the process state can be changed from queue to process. So I'll just again find a update a row data word. So I'll just pick this one, update a row, and we'll choose the work queue items as table, and row ID we are going to find it from again from output of parse JSON, and its workflow work queue item ID, which we are going to bind it to. And I scroll down and then go to this show all parameters. so that I can set up the output of my this process. The process result, I can say input process successfully, and over here I will set the status as processed and status reason as successfully processed again. So this is how I update the work item queue status back once the process or the actual calculation completes up. So just remember, between this tab parse JSON and update row, we have to do our custom business logic. Whatever processing you want to do with that work queue items, then you can easily do that in this separate processor flow. So we are done. I'm just saving it, and now we'll just do an end-to-end run, and I'll clean up my entire queue. I'll just go to see all and delete the entire queue once again, because I want everything to be running from scratch. So it's cleaned up. Now I will go to my initial Power Automate, that is of creation of the work items controller part, and I'll run that as manually. So work queue controller, I'll run this flow as manual. So it will do my initial first part, and I'll refresh my work queue items to check for the work queue items created or not. So work queue item created, these are queued up, and we can go to the other flow to check the running status. And as soon the items are created, so you can see like 24 seconds before, 19 seconds before, these are being created. 2 seconds before, individual work items is created as one instance of this processor flow, and we can visually see changing the status of our work queue items processed, and input is being defined over here, the processing nodes which we added up, and processed by. So this is how you can separate the massive transactional data processing into work items, can individually see all the items or instances running. If let's say if something broke up in between, for example, if these are not the numbers, let's say these are sales and gross sale by mistake as a human error, like it's entered as a text, so the calculation would not happen, then it will give you one exception. So you can just simply select your transaction, this work queue items, add it, change the queue status manually. You can edit this one, change the update the input, and then run it manually over here, and you can again park it for further processing. So individually you have a better control of all the instances, and you have a clear visibility what are the failed ones, rather than going into the apply each and searching for the next failed. So that's a cumbersome and pain process, I would say, and this is very much clean. So for bulk upload operations, just remember to have your work queues and work queue items created, and simplify your logic. You simplify your flows, make it better, efficient, and maintainable. So that is the intent of today's video, and I found this feature as very useful, so you may also find it. And if you have any question, then do drop your comment. If you like the video, do press the thumb icon and subscribe to my channel. Thank you.